Grace and peace to you in the name of God the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. Do you know the story of Esther? Are you familiar at all with this tale of spousal anger that turns into political intrigue, petty squabbling that goes viral, jealousy that threatens to cause destruction on the broadest scale imaginable? This story of excessive displays of power that only reveal weakness, apparent weakness that reveals strength, all-consuming personal spite that threatens violence on a massive scale, vengeance that might or might not be the hand of God at work. It's quite the story, melodramatic, over the top, excessive in just about every imaginable way. To my mind, the book of Esther is the final blow to any theory of biblical literalism. In fact, based on what historians know from extra-biblical sources, scholars agree that this story almost certainly did not occur. It lives somewhere in the realm of myth or political satire or social critique. But as we know from any story that moves us to contemplate our moral relationship with each other, with society, and with God, just because a story didn't happen doesn't mean it's not true. Truth resides just as surely, just as deeply in fiction as it does in any ripped from the headlines story, sometimes more so because it sneaks up on us unaware. Think about Ebenezer Scrooge or Princess Buttercup and the Man in Black in The Princess Bride. In the first chapter of the book of Esther, we meet only one of our major players, Ahasuerus, the ruler of Persia, along with his wife Vashti. Now, she's a minor character in our story, appearing only in today's reading. But like many minor characters, like Jacob Marley or Miracle Max, she has a lot to contribute. In some ways, she does more to move the plot along than her husband, the ruler, does. Ahasuerus, which means mighty man, is the Hebrew translation of Xerxes, which means hero among kings. It's likely that whoever wrote this story intended it to be about Xerxes I, who ruled the first Persian Empire from 486 to 465 BCE. Despite his name, it's pretty clear from the outset that the writer of the book of Esther doesn't have much respect for Ahasuerus, although they want to make it clear that he's powerful and full of himself and his own importance. Now, although Esther is categorized with the histories or the writings in the Hebrew Testament, it also includes characteristics that are common to wisdom literature in the Bible. One of those characteristics is the importance of proportion. Wise people act and react in proportion to what a situation calls for. Unwise or foolish people often act and react in a manner that's disproportionate to what's called for. Ahasuerus is clearly among the unwise from the start of our story. Look at this party he threw. 180 days for all the government officials, all the administrators and nobles, all the members of the court, with all the wealth of the empire on display. And he followed that up with 7 more days of partying just for the locals. Imagine being a resident of the capital city and being invited to a party like this, where every wine goblet is unique. The furniture is made of gold and silver. The whole place is crafted of marble and other precious materials, almost like a gold ballroom. It's so over the top, it defies description. And there are no rules but one at this banquet. Do what you want, stop when you want. What motivates Ahasuerus to throw two back-to-back parties like this for the elite in the empire, followed by the locals in the capital city? It reeks of excess, of a display of power and wealth and privilege, of look at me, I'm the mighty man, the hero among kings. What can't I do? Who can't I command? He's about to find out. Because while he's been hosting his party, Queen Vashti has been hosting her own banquet for the women. And all of a sudden, we realize that the women, or at least the queen and the other women of the court, haven't been at the king's party. What kind of parties has the king been hosting for the last 187 days? So on the 187th day of continuous partying, Ahasuerus decides that while he's showing off the wealth and beauty of the imperial court for the court officials and the citizens of the town, he might as well show off the beauty of his queen. So again, in a display of power and extravagance out of proportion to what is required, he sends his 7 eunuch servants to summon Queen Vashti to the party in all her royal finery. By now, they must have been married long enough that she knows her husband's quirks and faults. As queen, she's the first and most important woman in the harem, but far from the only woman in his life. So surely she knows what she risks by saying no to him. She risks her title, her position, being banished, possibly even losing her life. How many times has he shown her that what he values most about her is her beauty? That she's another possession, like the hundreds of unique goblets, or the white and purple tapestries, or the gold and silver couches. Something to be shown off, admired, and then put away again until the next time. But somehow, somewhere along the line, Vashti has gotten tired of the disrespect. She's gotten sick of only being appreciated for her looks. And so she says no, she's not coming. She's hosting her own party with her own friends. Despite being the king of the biggest empire in the world, despite commanding so many riches and so many territories from India to Ethiopia, despite being rich enough to host parties that lasted over 6 straight months, despite having 7 eunuchs to do his bidding, despite all that power, Ahasuerus doesn't have the power to command his wife. He's humiliated in front of the court and everyone in the city. Now, there are 2 basic ways you can react when you've been humiliated. You can react privately. You can choose to talk it out or not with the other person, deal with any thoughts or emotions that the event has brought up, and work through it and get past the sting of the humiliation. It might take some time, but as far as anyone else is concerned, the event fades pretty quickly. Or you can react publicly. You can launch a counterattack, often out of proportion to the initial event, and hope that your retelling of the story becomes the one that people believe, remember, and pass on. If you win big. Your opponent loses credibility for a very long time. After all, what do you remember most about Anita Hill? About Monica Lewinsky? But if you lose big. Your humiliation becomes publicly known and talked about beyond your ability to control the story. And that's the road Ahasuerus sets his feet on when he asks his 7 advisors, "What does the law say?" By the way, as king, he ought to know what the law says about his wife's refusal to obey his command. And just like that, a personal dispute between him and his wife becomes a political crisis when he and his 7 advisors whip themselves into a panic over all the other wives who they are certain will follow in Vashti's footsteps. They act all out of proportion to Vashti's response, issuing a royal decree that banishes Vashti and appoints someone else in her place, and moreover spreads word of Vashti's refusal and her banishment throughout the empire. Fear-based as it is, it would be easy to say this edict is ridiculous, except for all of the women who will suffer throughout the Persian Empire because of it. And we know that this isn't unique to the ancient world. It still happens today. I think most of us women probably have at least one story that involves being told you'd be prettier if you smiled more, grew your hair out, cut your hair, wore more makeup, wore less makeup. The list goes on and on, as if being pretty is the pinnacle achievement anyone can hope for in her life and career. And that's not the least of it. When a woman accuses someone of harassment or assault, how often is she the victim of a counterattack? She shouldn't have dressed like that. She shouldn't have been walking alone. She shouldn't have been at that party. She shouldn't have been drinking so much. You've heard them all and more. We are still deeply held captive to a patriarchy. In our country, to a white supremacist patriarchy that seeks to protect and maintain its power and privilege, even at the expense of the truth. We see this even in the church, as attempts to cover up infidelity or even abuse are exposed, and churches, sometimes entire denominations, are left to deal with the fallout that results from people loving power and control over other people more than they love God. Vashti disappears from our story after today, but Ahasuerus remains. We're left with his weakness masquerading as power, his vast wealth, the territories and armies at his command, his inability to act or even, it seems, to think without his advisors telling him how. But what Vashti leaves behind for us to consider is her moral courage. She knows that Ahasuerus' power doesn't give him the moral right to mistreat her, to order her around for his pleasure like any other trinket or object in his collection. And so, despite the risk to herself, she takes a stand. Does she know that it will result in this edict that threatens all women? It may be a risk that she's willing to take. She is not one of God's people, but she is working as God's agent in this story. She's precipitating the crisis. But little does she or anyone see what form this crisis will take. In the second chapter, we meet Esther for the first time. We've seen that Ahasuerus' names are indicative of what he thinks about himself. What about Esther's? Hadassah, her Hebrew name, means myrtle or pleasing scent and is a symbol of love and marriage. Esther means star and is associated with Ishtar, the Persian goddess of war and sexual love. It's also related to the Hebrew word Hester, which means hiddenness. She's a very different person from Ahasuerus. Where he delights in excess and disproportionate response, she doesn't go above and beyond, and it works in her favor. She's a favorite of the eunuch in charge of the harem, who instructs her on how to appeal to the king. After 12 months of preparations, she joins the harem and wins his favor, eventually becoming queen. But for Esther, that is the best of only bad choices. There is no choice that allows her to go back home to Mordecai. For Ahasuerus, it's still all about power, this time about regaining it. If he couldn't control Vashti, he will find someone else whose beauty pleases him, someone he can control. But for Esther, it's also about power. She has the innate power that comes from knowing who she is, and the power that she discovers she has from being well liked and not only by the king. But she also has a secret. She's been instructed by her uncle Mordecai to keep her Jewish identity hidden, and this puts her at considerable risk, requiring her to be on her guard at all times. It's clear that Esther is more than just a pretty face, whatever Ahasuerus may think. Our reading, and therefore our sermon, ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger this week. But it prompts some questions for us to ponder as we consider where Esther's story will take us next week. We've seen Vashti stand up for what she believes in and be banished. And we've seen Esther hide her religious identity and assimilate. What does it mean to hold fast to what we believe in the face of tyranny? Does it mean standing firm like Vashti no matter the consequences? Or does it mean blending in, not making waves, and biding our time like Esther? How does God stand with those who are objectified and undervalued because of prevailing social standards or power structures that keep them locked into harmful circumstances or patterns that are outside their control? How do we stand with them? Amen.